Welcome to TheKillFile, your favorite true crime podcast. I'm your host, Brittany Spears. Each week, we will explore the dark corners of true crime, unsolved mysteries, and murder. Join me as we uncover secrets, investigate evidence, and dive into the chilling details of some of the most fascinating cases. Get ready for a journey into the dark unknown because, in TheKillFile, nothing stays buried forever. Hello there, and welcome to episode 88 of TheKillFile. I am so glad that you guys are back for another story. Before we jump into today's case, a few quick reminders. First, please take a second to rate, review, subscribe, or follow us on your app. It's one of the best ways to support the podcast, and it only takes a second. Next, please check out the website, TheKillFile.com, where you can find the merch shop, where we have fun true crime-themed shirts, tank tops, sweatshirts, etc. It's a fun place to be, and it will also help to support the podcast and sport your favorite true crime gear with the rest of us. The Hidden Files, the bonus content from The Kill File, is still over on the Patreon for you to check out if you're interested, but the newest episodes will resume in the next few months, so be excited for those, and maybe I will put a few more out eventually for the rest of us to hear. Lastly, don't forget to follow us on social media, where we are on Blue Sky, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and of course, YouTube. If you're interested in my more personal musings, you can follow my public page on Facebook, which is just my name and Kill File attached to the end. Okay, that's it for business. Let's talk about today's case. Today, we are going to discuss a man named Charles Sobhraj, aka the Serpent, aka the Bikini Killer. This will be the first part of a two-part episode. This story has a rich background that really lets us learn about how someone may escalate to their crimes from childhood, and it's an interesting story. So let's get to it. Our story today is going to take us across the world to Saigon, now officially known as Ho Chi Minh City, according to an AI overview. This is located around the southern region of Vietnam, running along the Saigon River. During the Second World War, a teenage girl said to be a beautiful young woman named Noi, who had sadly lost both of her parents already, decided to leave her current village that she was living in and head to Saigon. Saigon was said to be seemingly glamorous at the time, with the overview quoting it as being known as the Paris of the Orient. The downtown area was said to be in French colonial style, elegantly lined with trees, and the cafes were of European style. Nightlife would be centered around a place called Catanat Street, where a famous hotel stood, called the Continental Hotel, where the elite and visitors had a chance to engage one another. Dance halls were popular at the time, and advertisements for the area showed bars, restaurants, and such dance halls as attractions for people to get out and about. According to a book that I used heavily for today's case called The Life and Crimes of Charles Sobhraj, written by Richard Neville and Julie Clarke, Noi got a job in a Smart Men's Outfitters as a shop girl off Catanat Street, where she would be promoted rather fast to a cashier. As Noi was leaving work one night, she had seen her employer, a man named Charles Sobhraj, speaking with a man in the doorway who was said to be a Japanese officer. Charles was of Indian descent and described as a handsome man. That night, Charles invited Noi to go out to a casino with him. Now, Charles at the time was a businessman owning a few shops, including 2 tailor stores, and above one of them is where he lived in a large apartment with 4 different servants. I think it's safe to say that he was wealthy, and when he and Noi met and went out, she would quickly become his girlfriend and then moved in with him. Not long after all of this, Noi would end up becoming pregnant. On April 6, 1944, Noi, at just 20 years old, would give birth to Charles, as the area was being attacked by guerrilla warfare. Charles's original name was a more traditional Indian name, being Gorma, and over the next few years, I guess his name changed quite a bit, with his full name being Hochind Bonani Gorma Charles Sobhraj, which you can hear his father's name in there, Hochind Sobhraj, and others thrown in there as well. That's a complete mouthful to say. When Charles was around 1 year old, there was an incident where Noi and Charles were taken off of the street and actually kidnapped for ransom, which was common, I guess, back then. However, the kidnappers didn't realize who they had taken, as Hochind had friends in high places, and after the ransom was demanded, as the kidnappers went to pick up the money, they would be ambushed by Japanese military personnel who rescued both Noi and Charles, thankfully. Charles's early years were surrounded by war and violence in the city around him as different regimes tried to take hold. Eventually, as Charles was around 3 years old, Noi would become pregnant again. And with Hochind having returned from his home in Pune, India, he had to break the news to Noi that he had married a young girl from India. He would tell Noy that it was an arranged marriage by his family and that he didn't have a choice in the matter. Noy was seemingly devastated by the news, and although Ho-Chind tried to tell her that it didn't matter, and that Noy could continue to live and stay with him, she was crushed, packing her bags and leaving Charles' father on the spot. She would then meet Charles's soon-to-be stepfather, a man named Jacques Russell, a sergeant from Bordeaux. Noy and Jacques were in love, and Jacques had told Noy that he wanted to accept and raise Charles as his own son, and although the pair were married after Noy gave birth to what would be her and Ho-Chind's second child, the couple had already named the little girl Nicole, which was the name of Jacques' mother. It was said that after Charles had been taken from his birth father and the lifestyle that he had been living in Saigon, now that he was a 4-year-old boy, he was becoming increasingly difficult. He didn't want to call Jacques, quote-unquote, papa or father, and would even run from Jacques when he tried to hold him, saying that he wanted his father Ho-Chind. Look, as a parent in a blended family myself, I can attest to how difficult it can be not only to join families with another already established, albeit broken family, but being a step-parent comes with its own set of hardships and sometimes turmoil. It seems to be pretty rare that a blended family zips up nicely together without some hiccups and struggles along the way. And although my family has settled in our lives for the past 12 or 13 years of blendedness, I would be lying if I said that it was perfect over the years. Being a stepchild or step-parent, it's not easy, and I can imagine that for a 4-year-old to lose a parent and then gain another so quickly, it would be difficult and confusing, and would maybe need some time for adjustment. At some point, Noy and Jacques thought it would be better for Charles if he was left with Ho-Chind, because Ho-Chind had the means to look after Charles well, and the couple thought that it would be the best thing for Charles at the time. However, after Noy was pregnant with what was her 4th child, Jacques' 2nd biological child, the position Jacques had with the military sent the couple right back to where this all started, Saigon. When Noy arrived, she left her other children in the French barracks to go find Charles, who was said to have sort of looked out for himself or raised himself, and according to the book, this could be because his new stepmother didn't want the reminder of Ho-Chind's former lover around all the time. When Noy arrived to find her son, she was told by the headmaster that her son was in the yard watching after the pigs. She was told that he was being punished for his behavior in school of distracting other kids and not listening. The other children that Charles was said to have had to learn to grow up around, now at 7 years old, were tough and gritty. Learning to live in a place like this with war and service members about, the kids in the area learned to take bets from the servicemen and did whatever they could to earn some money, including being messengers. However, when Noy realized how things were going for Charles, she was horrified, and with Ho-Chind's permission, she regained custody of Charles and brought him back to her home with Jacques and the other children. So at the time, in Saigon, the Viet Minh, which was a communist movement that was also said to be underground, they were fighting against and resisting the French colonial rule. And along with fighting them, they were also fighting the state of the Vietnam government, which had finally been established in 1949 in the area and was backed by France. So not only was there resistance, but there were guerrilla attacks, terrorism, assassinations, and even bombs. This is what Charles would grow up seeing for a while, as his stepfather was part of the French army and for those years while the conflict was ongoing. There was an incident where Charles and his mother were going to see a movie, and Charles, as they were headed to see a movie in one particular cinema, Charles changed his mind and wanted to go to a different one across the street. And because Noy didn't want Charles to throw another tantrum, she just took him to the other one. After the movie was out and they passed the first cinema, the two had seen body after body being taken out on stretchers from a bomb attack. Noy told Charles that he had saved them and hugged him. This was a memory that stuck out to Charles, as it was said that it was then that he realized how special he was, and even felt a sense of immunity to violence around them. It was said that the U.S. was concerned at the time that if the French military lost to the Viet Minh, that communism would spread, which is why the U.S. wanted to figure out how to help them without sending our soldiers over there on foot. Another incident of violence that Charles was said to have witnessed was a bomb striking close by, just obliterating people, where Charles would be an 8-year-old walking by, seeing the carnage. I'm talking bodies without heads, people pinned to the ground by debris and bleeding, and I can only imagine calling out or screaming in agony. Charles was said to have seen the skull that had been separated from a body not far. Imagine what the effect that these things would have on you as a child. It was stated in resources that whenever Noy would leave the house, it became a habit for Charles to run back to his father's house. The first time this happened, Noy returned. She was in hysterics, thinking that he had actually been kidnapped again. However, he was found hiding under Hochen's bed. The next time this happened, Charles was able to evade the authorities and any checkpoints that were in the area until he got to his father's house. Apparently, this embarrassed Noy that she couldn't keep control over her son and how his father's new household may feel about this happening. It got to the point where Noy would lock Charles in a bathroom whenever she left, but even with reinforcements, this wouldn't hold Charles back from leaving the house and going to his father's. When that didn't work, Noy started tying Charles to the bed when she left, which is horrifying, and he also escaped that. When he was dragged back this time, she tied him even more secure, and trying to teach Charles a lesson, she decided to leave him tied to the bed for multiple days. Sources would state that Charles had an unfortunate habit, if that's what you want to call it, of bedwetting. Although he was taken by his mother to numerous doctors, the bedwetting continued, until eventually Noy tried to help her son by tying a string around his penis at night. I'm assuming to close off his urethra and prevent him from being able to urinate at night unknowingly. That's a choice. Of course, we now know more about mental health and signs of trauma and how bedwetting is a definite sign of trauma. But back then, especially in those times, I'm sure it was looked at as a physical problem, but that's just my guess. As far as the war would go, eventually the French had to surrender to the Viet Minh, and Vietnam was divided into two states. Jacques and Noy would, in 1953, move their family back to France. Unfortunately for Charles, his stepfather was again called back to Vietnam, where Jacques and Noy would make the decision to leave Charles and Nicole, the older two children, in boarding schools. Charles, now 9 years old, was forced into a Catholic boarding school. I cannot imagine what the violence and death did to his psyche, and now we are adding in Catholicism in a boarding school near Paris in the 50s? Yikes. Charles was upset about the school and begged his mother to take him with her. She told him to be brave and that he would get used to the school and it wouldn't be for that long. When Charles was in tears, his mother told him, as there would be no future in Vietnam, that he should be thankful to get the opportunity to learn French and go to such an expensive school. She also said her and his stepfather only wanted what was best for him. When his mother finally came to get him a year later, she decided to lie to Charles to tell him that his father was deceased, seemingly hoping that this would stop him from running away and perhaps he would settle down a bit. Noy and Jacques now had 7 children. Although Jacques tried to help his stepson with finding different menial jobs, nothing seemed to work for Charles. At age 15, Charles found himself again at a boarding school, although this time it was easier for him to make friends as he spoke the language and had tales of his grand adventures in different countries. When Charles turned 16, his headmaster at school wrote Noy and Jacques, saying that Charles had an episode of rash behavior and smashed school property, although the note seemed to blame it on his puberty. Then a few weeks after the incident, Charles's parents were informed that Charles had ran away from the school. Charles's parents would find him at an old neighbor's house in the backyard, upset, feeling like his family had lied to him about his father's death and stating that he didn't believe them. Jacques tried to explain to the teen that they thought it was for his own good and explained that Hochen now had 2 separate families, one with 6 children and 3 in another. Charles said he didn't care that his father would be busy with so many other kids. He wanted to go back to Saigon. After trying to make it to Saigon again, on a ship this time, with a younger companion, Michael, the two, Charles and Michael, were caught, and once again, Charles was found by Noy and Jacques. This time, though, Jacques made him a deal. In defeat, Jacques would say that he would write to his father Hochen and ask if he would be willing to take Charles back to Saigon with him to live. But Jacques said that if he did this for Charles and Hochen wanted Charles to stay with his mother and Jacques, would he be willing to accept that and try again at school? Charles agreed. When Hochen's letter back finally came, it said that his son's future was too important to talk about over the mail and he was already going to be coming to Paris soon and would arrange to meet with them. When Hochen arrived, he spoke to Charles and Jacques, and not only was Hochen upset that a son of his was working as an assistant to a chef because his son shouldn't be working such menial jobs, but if he took Charles with him, Charles would have to work hard and be good and start at the bottom of his company. Noy agreed that it was time for Hochen to help out with Charles. Her and Jacques were poorer, and Ho-Chin had plenty of money and companies to help Charles get on a better path and pay his way. Noi and Jacques had to sell their family car at one point to pay for some of the trouble that Charles had already gotten in. Ho-Chin agreed and said that at the end of the month, when he left to go back to Saigon, he would take Charles. And Jacques started working on Charles's passport in the meantime. Unfortunately, when the time came for Ho-Chin to head back home, Charles's passport wasn't there yet, so he stated that he would simply send him a ticket when the passport came and it wasn't a big deal. Charles, though, didn't believe him. He felt that everyone in his life had lied to him so often, that no one was to be trusted and that no one really cared about him. He used his mother, saying that the boarding school was only for a short bit, but how she didn't come back for a year, as an example. Ho-Chin left for Saigon, and eventually Charles's passport came. He didn't seem to want to take the chance that his father would maybe not send a ticket. The passport was only good for 6 months, and Charles figured once he was with his father that Ho-Chin would sort out the matter. Charles was trying to come up with ways to make money, as he had quit his job at the restaurant because Ho-Chin didn't like that his son worked this type of low-end job. Charles had a little money saved, but not enough, and thought of different ways to come up with money when he would read in the newspaper that some local women were being robbed during the day at their homes. Charles thought to himself he could do something like that, but then decided no, there was no way he could. Eventually, though, Charles would head out, and with the money he had, he would buy a gun. That would be the boost he needed to be able to rob someone for the money for his ticket. The first robbery would come as Charles was back and forth about whether he would actually be able to do it or not. He didn't seem to really want to hurt anyone. Finally, he pressed the button of a home, and when the woman answered the ring, he said he needed to check the meter. The woman let him in, and when she turned her back to close the door, then turned back towards Charles, he was holding a gun at her, telling her not to move. She was terrified, obviously, and let out a little scream, when Charles then dropped the gun and pounced on her, telling her to be quiet and he wouldn't hurt her. This is when she told Charles to please be careful because she was pregnant. Immediately, Charles felt bad and said that all he wanted was the money and that he wasn't going to hurt her. And after she gave him what she had, he told her that he needed to tie her up just to give himself some time to get away, apologizing to her. She asked if he would be willing to do it in her bedroom because her baby was in the bedroom. Talk about your first crime being an utter disaster, right? Can you fucking imagine doing this for the reasons that you are? Not that they're good reasons, by any means, to hold a fucking gun to anyone. But trying to see through the lens of this troubled kid with so far a seemingly good heart just has had like the roughest of goes in life. Being left here and there and taken from your father who doesn't seemingly want you, but at least your mom does. However, all you want is to go back to your father because he has money and a better life there waiting for you, you think. You finally get the opportunity to go and you feel like you have to do something drastic to get the money to go. And you think you're not going to hurt anybody, you're just going to get the money. And you're already not even sure if you can do that. And then the lady not only has a baby, but she's fucking pregnant. Oh man, what a first taste at crime. I feel like that would be enough to make anyone feel so guilty. Let's remember, this is still a child we're talking about. I know that he is going to grow up and probably be a monster and we will hate him, but for now, he, while unruly and kind of a shit, is still a kid. And to top it off, he only got 70 francs from this encounter before he headed back home. Just 2 days later, Charles did it again. Obviously, what he got was not enough to afford a ticket back to Saigon, but this time he took a coat and threw it over the woman when she was screaming. Her 6-year-old, though, which he didn't plan for, ran out of the house screaming, and when Charles realized that he was going to get caught, he took off to the basement to hide in some coal. He was found and dragged out to a police van where they threw him in a cell for what he was doing. Needless to say, when Noi and Jacques showed up at the police station, they were upset and told Charles to beg the woman who he just tried to rob, who was also there, for forgiveness. And after he did, she asked not to press any charges. Jacques was surprisingly calm, although Noi was furious. It seems like Jacques was really trying for Charles and tried to do everything that he could to help him. I think he felt really bad for the kid. He told Charles that he still wanted to help him get to Saigon, but he would need to go to work with him every day so that he can keep an eye on him. The police would eventually call Jacques and say they needed him back at the police station. Jacques asked Charles if he did anything else, which, of course, he said no, but When they got there, Charles was arrested for the first woman he robbed. Jacques said that if he had known how bad he wanted to go, he would have just paid for the ticket for him. Charles was embarrassed and felt extremely guilty for what he had done, crying constantly. When Noy came to see him the next day and Charles asked where Jacques was, Noy said he had a nervous breakdown, thanks to Charles, blaming him for his health condition. Charles felt so bad finding out Jacques would be in the hospital for the rest of his life, worsening. Charles begged to get out so that he could say sorry. I think he realized in that moment that Jacques had really done a lot and cared for him and tried so hard. At court, Charles begged the pregnant woman for her forgiveness for what he did to her. The woman was pretty nice after his apology and asked to withdraw her complaint about him. The judge accepted this, but said that he still had to go to special juvenile court for what he did, where he was sentenced to 6 months in juvenile detention, but suspended. When he got home, he realized his passport was taken away by the police because I guess he wasn't a real France citizen, so he wasn't supposed to get that in the first place. But Jacques, being the good person he was, had arranged for some other type of passport for him instead, right before he broke down. Charles went to visit Jacques in the mental hospital, apologizing and telling him happily that he got his ticket to Saigon. It had finally arrived. Charles was finally able to head to Saigon on his other temporary passport on his way back to where he felt he belonged and longed to be. Charles made it back to Saigon where his father and a few of his siblings were waiting. Immediately, Ho Chun told him things had changed in Vietnam and that he needed to learn English as one of the first things he did there. It seemed Charles really wanted to take this opportunity to prove his worth to his father, getting up early to help his father in the shop in his new clothes that his father had bought him. It didn't last long, though, as he grew bored with the business and even the classes that he was enrolled in to learn English. He turned instead to martial arts, but that too didn't last long. He started scheming instead, running a smuggling ring. Charles's visa was expiring, and he was told that he needed to join the Vietnamese military because his mother was Vietnamese, but Ho Chun, he didn't want that. Instead, he wanted to get his son Indian citizenship, but after putting him on a boat to Bombay, he would soon find his son back at his home, having stowed away on a boat and sneaking back over. His father was furious, asking if he wanted to be killed there in the military for no reason. His father took him to immigration. They sent him back to Punta, India, where he was a pain in the ass for his hosting family and then ran away again. He wrote his mother begging her for money to come back to France, but she never responded. He then showed up again at his father's house where his father slapped him across the face, saying that he was stealing his money, had crashed his car, and was setting a bad example for his other children. His father once again put him on a boat away from Vietnam, and this time Charles realized he couldn't stay there. When Charles was leaving, his father said to him, quote, "You're not wanted here. Remember that," end quote, which is pretty sad. Charles would then ask the sailor on the ship where the boat would go after Bombay, and when the sailor told him Marseille, which is in France, he decided to stay on the boat until he reached Marseille, and then his mother would be forced to help him. However, that is not how it went. Charles was now an adult at 18 years old when he landed in Marseille, and the French immigration authorities wouldn't allow him to work, only giving him a temporary passport. This would set Charles on the path of a criminal career, as this led him to a life of what started as petty crime. He would steal cars mostly, which he was caught for over and over and jailed for numerous times. When he was 24 years old, he was again in jail, and after this 5-year stint, he was supposed to be deported. But no one was really sure where he would be deported to. Would it be Vietnam or India? Around this time, a type of worker, I don't think it's like a social worker, but it's rather someone who maybe helps people that are like coming out of jail that they think still have a chance, almost like a sponsor. This man is named Alain Bernard. Bernard would be there to help Charles as he got out of prison, helping him by writing his mother and father, who had softened now that time had passed. I believe his father even offered to have him back to Saigon and give him a branch manager position. However, Bernard helped Charles with a place to stay and a job until he got on his feet. Not long after this, Charles would meet a woman who was to become his wife, Chantal. After the pair met and courted briefly, they became engaged. Bernard was seemingly a little hesitant about their marriage given his past. After a night of gambling where Charles was winning with a large pot of money, he lost it all. Chantal asked him why he was unable to just walk away when he was up by so much money. And Charles asked for her to forgive him, but he kept thinking about all of the things that he could offer his wife to be. Not just a marriage, but maybe a new home or a new car. And then he lost it all. When he thought he could win it back, he instead lost even more. In fact, he had to settle the matter with management, and he asked his fiancée for her necklace that she was wearing, which sadly was a family heirloom. He said that he would pawn it to pay management and assured her that he would get it back for her. The same evening as the pair drove back to Paris, it was stormy out and Charles couldn't see well. Going over the speed limit, Charles was about to be pulled over, but instead, he said that he didn't have time to stop for the police on this evening. The car then sadly crashed, and as the two were in the hospital waiting for some x-rays, Charles was suddenly nowhere to be found, which confused Chantal until an officer came up to her and told her the car that Charles was driving was stolen. He was then arrested the next day. After his arrest, Charles was rushed to a prison hospital, and as Bernard made his way to check on his friend, he ran into Chantal in the hospital waiting room. Bernard had wanted to warn Chantal many times about who Charles really was and what he might be capable of, but he struggled because he didn't know if it was his place. He wanted to tell her that while Charles had been staying with him fresh out of prison, he was sort of good with the ladies who he would bring back to Bernard's house, and then he would later hear from them that Charles had swindled them into giving him money. When Bernard asked Chantal why he was in the emergency room in the first place, she had said that Charles swallowed a spoon to be transferred to the prison that they were currently at because it had longer visiting hours. Chantal had just finished visiting him for a few hours. Bernard then offered to give her a ride back to Paris, and while they drove back, they spoke about Charles. Bernard would ask if she finally found out, seemingly about his criminal past. I guess Chantal had known that he had been in trouble before, but she didn't quite know the extent of it or what it was for because Charles didn't seem to like to talk about it, and because she loved him so much, she didn't press the matter. Chantal said yes, she now knew everything, and even about how much Bernard had helped Charles during and after prison, giving him this chance at a fresh start. When Bernard asked if she was still going to marry him, she said yes, she loved him so much. And even though she was blinded by her love and now saw him for who he was, she still saw the good in him behind his foolish mask, and she intended to stand by him. She thought her love would fix everything because Charles never really had love with his horrible childhood. When Bernard warned that if she married him, then she would become dependent on him and that there was more to him than just petty thievery. He asked her if Charles's job was going so well, which it was, then why did he have to do what he did to ruin everything, and said that he already had Chantal's love when he stole the car. Kind of warning her, like, I know that you think you can fix him, but there seems to be more to him than you know, maybe a compulsion. Bernard also said that the psychiatrist he saw from court said that Charles had other problems. When Chantal asked what he meant, Bernard told her that he may have tendencies of compulsion and rebellion, and he may have a hard time learning from his mistakes or his experiences. He went on to say that Charles may not be able to sympathize with other people, and then even said that it was his own thought that what if he didn't show a lack of remorse for hurting other people. When Chantal asked if the psychologist had anything good to say about Charles, Bernard said yes, they did. They said that he could readjust to society with treatment, and that they didn't feel that Charles was dangerous. That was enough for Chantal to feel that she was right about him. Yes, he's flawed and has made mistakes, but with her loving him the way that she did, and the fact that Charles had someone who actually had his back for the first time, he would change his ways to be a better person. When Charles got out of prison, Chantal was there waiting for him, and a few months later, in November of 1969, they were married. Not long after this incident, the next would actually involve his sister, Nicole. I guess Nicole had been doing good in life, and while Charles was feeling weighed down by having to report to the authorities once a week to check in and being married, he didn't feel the freedom he wanted and thought that if he could just get enough money together, he and Chantal could go back to Asia and start over and everything would be fine. I couldn't help but notice now, I don't know if this is just how he was always going to be or if this is from his childhood, but Charles keeps wanting these chances to start over and keeps seemingly telling himself that if he could just get this or that or go here or there, that things would fix itself and that he could do better and live better. Like, I understood his longing to be with his father. I mean, his father was rich, and every time he would run away to there, he would see the lifestyle that they were living, and then he would be forced to go back to his mother and his stepfather, who were poor, but at least they cared about him. So feeling like if he could just make it to his father's home and be given new clothes and a car and a chance, that everything would be all right. And that's why he fought so hard for that. But then after he got that, he wasn't satisfied, right? Like he blew it there and the next place and the next. Like this young man doesn't seem to be satisfied in life with anything. Not the chances that he's been given after spending 5 years in jail, not the new bride that he has, not the job that he has that's steady, nothing. He keeps wanting more and more. And I think that we see that a lot in some of these cases of serial killers or killers, how they evolve from needing more thrills or more money or whatever they're missing in their lives to the next big thing. And eventually that next big thing is murder. When Charles started realizing he wasn't free the way he wanted to be, he wanted to take Chantal to Asia. So he came up with a scheme that blew up in his face. He told his sister, Nicole, that her son had been in an accident and that he was going to take her to him, but instead he drove her to his flat, locked her inside, and went back to her business asking for checks for Nicole, that she was the one who sent him. He forged a check signature and stole 6,000 francs from his own sister. In his mind, if he could just get the money and then go to a casino and win more and then give his sister her money back plus interest, everything would be fine. Instead, he lost everything. Chantal offered to pay Nicole back in installments, but Nicole said that this was unforgivable and she called the police. Charles was again arrested, but for whatever reason, the judge said that this was a family matter and said that Charles could be released from jail if Nicole was willing to withdraw her complaint. When Chantal went to visit Charles in jail, he was depressed, saying that he was going to die if they put him back in prison. This is when Chantal tried to cheer up her new husband by giving him the news that she was pregnant. And with that, Charles wanted to be free even more desperately, and he then begged Bernard to talk to Nicole, which he did, and she withdrew the complaint, freeing her brother. When Charles got back home, he had gotten a letter from his father, Hochend, saying that he was going to be visiting Paris soon. When his father came to visit, Charles was up to another scheme. He wanted to impress his father, and behind Chantal's back, he opened a new checking account the day before his father got there, and he cashed 6,000 francs in bouncing checks. That would be found out pretty quickly, and therefore Charles's plan was to impress his father with buying things that he really couldn't afford, and then convince his wife to go with him to Asia, back near his father, and open a few businesses where he could make a better living away from his criminal problems here in France. He told Chantal that if they didn't run, he was going back to prison for the fraud that he had just committed with the checks. Chantal packed her bags with tears in her eyes, realizing that she was going to be running from her life in France, where she had a job and where they had a steady home, leaving behind everything that she knew for just a chance at what she thought would be a good life with Charles in Saigon. Eventually, Hochend would write to Chantal after the gig was up, telling her not to come to Saigon with Charles because the French government had told the Vietnamese government about the fraud, and if they stepped foot in the country, they were both to be arrested. He warned that even he had to leave France a day early because they wanted to arrest him for even being with Charles as he was making large purchases on the bounced check money. He told her Charles was a con man, a crook, and was no good, basically, telling her to get away from him while she could. Instead of going to Saigon, Charles and Chantal would land in Bombay, where Chantal would give birth to their daughter, who they named Madhu. This is where Charles would give into his life as a con man, trying to make money the best way he knew how. He made money as a con man and a diamond smuggler, where he usually stole American and European tourist passports. It was said in sources that Charles would have extramarital affairs while he was gone and doing business, but even though Chantal knew, she stayed next to her husband. She truly believed that Charles was different and needed to have a different set of rules than others. She wanted to do her wifely duty and stand by Charles. There were many times the couple had no money, and then there would be times where they would have a ton of money and they were able to dine at the fanciest of places. Charles had grown to be a handsome and charismatic man, charming even the people he conned, who still liked him despite of being taken advantage of. He was that type of man, the kind that people engaged with, the energy that people loved. Charles and Chantal lived the kind of life where Chantal knew her husband was making deals and committing crimes, but she didn't really believe that he was doing anything too serious. More like the money-making kind of crimes. Chantal was still hopelessly in love with him after 2 years. While in Delhi, Charles committed a robbery of diamonds through the ceiling of a jewelry shop that was located beneath the hotel. Charles drilled through the floor, holding the woman who had occupied the room hostage while he broke into the jewelry shop. Chantal would see the story of this in the newspaper and saw that 2 Frenchmen had been caught for the theft of the jewels. When Charles was caught, he escaped with the help of Chantal, and after she was arrested for aiding him and she made bail, she would send their daughter to live with her parents in Paris and go on the run with Charles. Charles's first murder would shortly follow. And that, my friends, is where we are going to stop for part 1 of the Charles Sobhraj story. This story is insane, right? Like, what a life for this young man to have lived. It's utter chaos, back and forth, and believing you have the key to your new, better life just always out of your grasp until you finally get it and you realize that that's not really what you thought. I feel like we've all had a time like that in our life. Maybe not to this extent, but what a bummer. So the book that I mentioned, The Life and Crimes of Charles Sobhraj, it's such a good book. I'm actually in the middle of listening/reading it, and I have to cut a lot of it out so that this doesn't end up being a 5-hour episode of me just like rehashing the book to you guys. But if you guys want more details, and I mean way more details of this man's life, I suggest that you read the book or listen to it on Amazon. It's really good and interesting. There are other books out there as well and other resources about this man. I've heard that there's like movies and shows based on his life as well. As we will see, he ends up being pretty damn notorious, I guess. But I've actually never heard of him before. So as I'm starting this case, I cannot wait to see where the story takes us. I know just a tiny overview of what he did, but not exactly why. Well, I hope that you guys enjoyed this first part of the 2-part story, and I hope that you guys will come on back next Monday for the second part here on The Kill File, where nothing stays buried forever. Stay safe, you guys. Bye. All right, guys, that's going to do it for today. A few quick reminders before you go. Please don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review on your platform. It will help the podcast grow and other true crime lovers to find us. Also, check out the website, TheKillFile.com, where you can suggest a case, find our merch shop, and submit a listener file. Follow The Kill File on your favorite social media platforms. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky, and TikTok. Of course, you can always subscribe on YouTube as well. Find all of the links for the socials on the website. Come back on Mondays wherever you get your podcast fix when we will cover another case on The Kill File where nothing stays buried forever. Stay safe, you guys. Bye.